For the sake of brevity a little bit, what I want to focus on is undergraduates, so bachelor's degree students and then graduate students. And I want to break down American timelines, so like what Americans face versus what Chinese international students face when they have to deal with timeline. So they are quite different from each other. And one of the biggest misunderstandings that I constantly hear when I talk with students is that they hear through either campus professionals or like the student services office. They gather information from them that tends to be quite misleading because a lot of the timeline associated materials is really targeted more towards American students. So let's talk about the differences there first. With Americans, they're going to have really this ability to kind of do almost anything they want because they have no work restrictions. So they can do internships, part-time, full-time, anytime while they're in school, from freshman all the way to their, last year or their second year as a master's student. They don't have to worry about any kind of timing restrictions there. They can do campus recruitment and get hired during campus recruitment. So during the fall, they can interview during campus recruitment, and through 1 or 2 interviews, have a job offer that's extended for them the following May when they graduate. And it's not the same for Chinese students. So with Chinese students, because of the work restrictions, campus recruitment, I think, is one of the biggest things that impacts students. They go to campus recruitment a lot and think, oh, I can also interview and get a job. The sole purpose of campus recruitment is getting a job. Well, for Chinese international students, the sole purpose of campus recruitment is actually networking. So it's trying to learn about the company, build a little bit more relationships with them, and learn what you need to know in order to ace the interview later if you get an interview invitation. You won't really have too many opportunities to interview at all during campus recruitment because when it comes right down to it, they don't know that, or they're not sure if 8 months later you'll still be in the US. They don't know if you'll change your mind and go back to China. So the interviewing prospects or opportunities for Chinese international students during campus recruitment doesn't really apply to you like it does to Americans. So that's one common myth that I want to dispel. Another thing that I want to talk about with timeline is that internships, you've got 2 different kinds of internships. So you have the summer internships, which are typically full-time, 40 hours a week. Now, the only difference between full-time and part-time is the amount of hours you work per week. So full-time is about 32 to 40 hours, and part-time tends to be anything less than 32 hours. For international students, part-time means 20 hours or less. You have the 2 categories. You have the summer internships, and then you have the internships that fall in winter, fall, spring. Those are all kind of one category. Those internships in the fall, the winter, and the spring, you have no kind of extended hiring time with those, which means when a company wants to hire a fall intern or a winter intern, they're usually going to post that position about a month or so before they need the position filled, which means you have to go online and you have to look at the different websites and see if there's any new postings. You kind of have to check at least once every week or so. The summer positions, typically the large companies will hire for those a year in advance, which means toward the end of the summer, end of June, early July, like through the end of August, you've got like the big investment banks, you've got the big 4 accounting firms, you've got the big tech firms like Google and Amazon and Facebook. And those companies are going to hire for summer interns starting really far in advance for the following summer, right? So almost a year out. And that internship process takes a really long time. So even though you may apply a week after it's opened, you probably won't get your first round interview or know if you're getting a first round interview until January. So the process is actually quite lengthy, and you typically don't know if you have the internship or not until about March or April. So that's the process for a lot of those large companies. Now, all the other companies that are out there that aren't a major powerhouse in the US industry, those internships you can apply for anytime pretty much between December and then through the end of April, even into early to mid-May. So there are lots of opportunities if you don't happen to get into one of those top tier companies for you to apply to a lot of different really great companies again and again and again all the way through the middle of May. So there's lots of opportunities available for you. So even if you missed one of those during the fall, it doesn't mean that you're going to be out of summer internship opportunities. It's quite the opposite, extra. About 90% of summer internship opportunities are going to be filled through the months of January and March, and only about 10% are going to be filled during that like winter into January, starting from the previous fall sort of break time. So the next thing that I want to talk about is going to be the time difference for full-time employment. With full-time employment, a lot of this is a very delicate balance of time, depending on when you graduate and when you get your EAD card, which stands for Employment Authorization Document, which is the physical document, the card, that states when your OPT period begins and when it ends, okay? So the two can be used interchangeably. So when you hear me say OPT or EAD, they really just mean the same thing. For full-time, let's use some examples. So let's say that you're getting ready to graduate this December in 2018. For full-time employment, you have a couple options. So the first is that you can try through fall recruitment, see if you can get an internship and then get an offer for after you graduate in December. But that's less than 10% of the opportunities that will be available to you during full-time employment. The other over 90% is actually going to be really close to graduation time. Here's why. You cannot legally work in the United States until you get your EAD card. The government right now takes anywhere between 4 and 5 months to mail that card out to you. So the process kind of looks something like this. Before you graduate, so let's assume December 1st for our example is the graduation time. Before you graduate, you have 90 days before graduation where you're able to apply for your OPT. You get to pick the date that you want, and you can pick any date starting from the day after graduation. So in this example, December 2nd, up to 60 days after graduation. So in this example, that would actually be January or February 1st. So the best date for you to pick is going to be somewhere towards the end of January / beginning of February, because if you apply that 90 days before and then you push it to about 2 months after graduation, you get about a solid 5 months of time, which means you should get your EAD card on time. What happens to a lot of students is that they apply for their OPT and maybe they do it like a couple weeks after they're allowed to, and then they want to pick the very first date that they can after graduation. The issue a lot of them run into is that they graduate, that date comes, they still don't have their EAD card, and then they still don't get it for another like month and a half to 2 months later. And so there's all this time where they could be legally working and they can't actually work because they don't have their EAD card. So now they have a month and a half to find a job instead of 3 months to find a job. So this is really important, and a lot of international student offices don't understand really how this works. So I find myself, like during my profession, really making sure that students have a firm understanding of this, because this can make or break your ability to find a full-time job. Now, full-time employment compared to an internship can take up to 6 months for you to find a job. And this is right on par with American students. pretty much when Americans graduate, usually somewhere between 2 and 6 months, they can find full-time employment. And that's about the same time period for Chinese international students. So what this means is, even though you don't have your EAD card yet, let's say the December graduation date, you probably want to start looking around the beginning of November, because it's not very often that you'll find one within 2 months. So that way you give yourself time to have interviews, not pass them, continue to get interviews, send out lots of applications, go through that holiday time period where people don't hire, and then into January where you're about a couple weeks away from getting your EAD card. That way you've already had some experience, you have sent out a ton of applications, and now you're just waiting for responses. But your EAD or OPT time hasn't started yet, which means that even when you get to that time period, you're still going to have 3 more months where you can find a job when you've already been looking for 2. So really you're giving yourself about 5 months to find a job, which puts you perfectly in that 2 to 6 month time frame.